Well, welcome to another episode of the Warriors Walk. Today we're going to talk about conflict resolution and how to handle it biblically. So stay tuned. So Keith, you told me a while back that you were involved in a conflict, but it didn't quite go the way you thought.
Yes. So I've had lots of practice at handling other people's conflict, so to be a mediator and to help, years of ministry. There was one time I was a young youth pastor. I'm an old youth pastor now. But when I was much younger, I was right out of college. There was a girl that had, just some issues in our group with discipline. She got in trouble a lot, and
I think I actually remember this girl.
yeah. Well, no, this was not even at this church, so you
okay.
can't tie this to anyone specific. So,
Gotcha. Good.
yeah, but there was a girl that she got in trouble a lot, and her parents met with her parents several times and stuff. Sometimes there was issues, with her at youth group, but we had a snack bar at youth group where we would sell some snacks to help pay for more snacks. Basically, it wasn't like a money maker or anything like that, but it was a way that kids could just buy some snacks at youth group. And there was some significant amount of money missing from the money box that was sitting on the counter. And she was one of my snack bar employees. And so I quickly jumped to the conclusion, well, if the money's missing, she gets in trouble a lot. Must have been her that took the money. And so I realized after counting the money, that there was a significant amount of money missing. And so I immediately, this is right after youth group, she had already gone home, called her dad and said, "Hey, your daughter stole money from the church. We need to fix this. You guys need to come back and we need to figure this out." And he was not the warm and fuzzy, like welcoming this, this correction, that I thought. I was thinking, man, I'm doing this guy a favor by, telling him that his daughter, that I caught her stealing. And he goes, "Did you catch her stealing?" And I said, "Well, no. There's money missing." And she was, she was working at the snack bar. And he was like, "Hold up. Did you catch my daughter doing it?" He was very defensive. And I was like, "Oh, wait, okay, this is not the." And so he turns around and brings her back, and she's crying at this point. She's like, I didn't take any money. And I'm like, "Well, come to the conclusion. You were working here. There's money missing. You took it." And so I was like, "See," I looked and I lifted up the box and I lifted up the tray, and all the money was underneath the tray. And it was at that moment that I realized that I messed up pretty significantly, where I was like, "Oh my goodness, I just accused someone and jumped to the conclusion of something that they didn't even do wrong." And I felt so embarrassed. I felt so awful. And so there was a moment where, oftentimes we talk about conflict and how people hurt us, but I think we're all guilty if we dig deep enough to where we've messed up ourselves in tangible ways. Now, this was an honest accident. I didn't intentionally try to do things, but I really had to really figure out, okay, like, do I jump to conclusions and try to, confront things like this when I might have even been in the wrong? And so sometimes, we have friendly fire, right? Where we're think that other people are in the wrong, but they're on our side, or they're actually doing the right thing, and we were the ones that were in the wrong. And so when it comes to that, what are some things that we can remember just from a foundational level of addressing conflict? You have some stories about conflict. Now, there's lots of different types of conflict, and there's differing severities of that conflict as far as what's at stake. Mine was just the false accusation that I quickly made against someone. But what are some conflicts that you've been in that have been a lot more serious and life-threatening?
Yeah, I would say, some of the more intense ones, I operated in a small man element, four of us, and we were living with warlords and their minions, and when I say minions, like 400 of them, and, in East Africa. And so that narrows the region down for everybody.
Yeah, are you going to say the country? Yeah.
But while we were there, like, just learning how to navigate a situation where physical force isn't solving it, right? It's learning how to play nice. And it's reading the room. It's learning. And what I've learned, I think, in general about conflict, whether it's a dangerous solution or dangerous situation where, a guy's got an AK-47 on his lap and he has 400 people behind him and you have 3 behind you. Or, it could be in your home, right? It could be with your spouse. It could be with a coworker. Is that conflict never goes away on its own. If anything, it gets bigger. And so I've learned like you have to go towards it. And depending on how you're wired, like that can be really challenging. But my encouragement to people is like, even though it's hard, you want to go towards it. And I think one of the most helpful ways, again, fall back on Philippians 2, it's one of my favorite chapters in the Bible, but it's really approaching it in a sense of humility. And again, like seeing that person as, someone who God created. And granted, even in extreme situations where, they have a different belief system and they actually might want to kill you, like, that's one extreme. But then knowing, like, I've learned this in bucketfuls and being married to my wife, like, she's not the enemy, right? And so, like, if there is conflict, if there is a situation, to approach it with humility is a big deal. We learn from Romans 12, I think it's verse 18, when possible, to pursue things, peacefully with others too, right?
Yeah.
And God desires that. And that's how we really model even his love for others, right? Is this ideal of, keeping his commandments and loving him with all our heart and loving others like we love ourselves. And so I think those are some easy on-roads to at least start the conversation. And we've even, my wife and I, we've sampled this solution a little bit over the years, or this technique, but even just speaker listener, like just trying to just share your thoughts without being interrupted. And then your whole job is just to listen.
Yeah.
And so I think that's super helpful too. A
That's
lot more,
huge.
but I think that's enough to get us started.
Yeah. Well, and just to define, conflict is defined as a condition in which a person experiences a clash of opposing wishes or needs. And so that can come out to, you differ with a warlord that could literally take your life, or you can take his. To just a relational conflict within marriage or a dating relationship, or even parental conflict, or even just friendship conflict. And yeah, the verse in Romans where it says, we are to aim to live at peace so far as it depends on us. We can't control how other people, handle conflict towards us, but we want to make sure that we're doing everything in our power. And I was reminded, because we've been teaching through a series with our students here, on the book of Acts, and in Acts 9:31, we see this as exemplary in the early church. It says, so the church throughout all Judea and Galilee and Samaria had peace, and was being built up, and walking in the fear of the Lord and the comfort of the Holy Spirit, it multiplied. And I just thought that was fascinating. That was one of the descriptors of the early church, was that they had peace. Like they were living in peace, with the Lord, of course, because they had a relationship with Christ, but they had peace within each other too. And oftentimes we don't have peace within the body of Christ. We might be, differing on different beliefs, or, conflicts that have been unresolved. And so how has that played out as you've transitioned from a Navy SEAL to now a pastor? What have you seen conflicts like? Obviously, you're not the same type of conflicts that you're dealing with as a SEAL. But what kind of conflicts do you see most prevalent in the church today? Like, just kind of generically speaking, what are some things that cause some division within our own church in the Western world?
Yeah, I would say in general, most conflicts come, and we're displaying our own sinful nature. Like we're stubborn and we're selfish.
Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of times it's someone, their preferences aren't being met. Like that's a big deal. Like, they make almost memes off of this, and they do comedy videos on the Me Church, right? Where people, it's amazing. Like, the temperature's never right. The music's too loud. The music's not loud enough. On and on it goes. And really people are majoring in the minors instead of the majors. And I think our job as pastors is to help people understand what we're doing when we gather. Like we, the body, the physical people are the church. And whether you're meeting, in a dirt hut in the middle of somewhere, or you have these grandiose buildings that are throughout the United States and around the world, like to understand what you're doing. I think that's a big part of it, right? I think if we actually understand that we're in the presence of God and we're worshiping him, all these other little things should go away.
Yep.
And even like you and I have both coached people in the church where we try to diversify our music. We'll have old hymns on one Sunday, or a mix, and then we'll have some that are a little more upbeat, a little more modern. And to even celebrate, like maybe you're younger than me, and so like you want to get your jam on, and that's how you worship.
Yep.
I need to be celebrating that, right?
Yep.
And thankful that you're worshiping.
Maybe we'll mix in a Petra song every so often.
That's right,
just
or
for
bring
you.
back some old school, And I mean, even that's a good example though, right? Because I remember I was a leader in my youth group, and I had to defend. They were trying to ban Petra music in our youth group. because they were like, it's of the devil, and because it was rock and roll, right? I was that generation.
Yeah.
And yet I actually showed them like the lyrics are from God's word. Like,
Yeah.
and just because it's with a guitar you don't like and drums, like maybe you should take a rap off. And
Yeah.
that was a little challenging for a teenage boy to go
Yeah.
talk to leaders in the church, but at least they received it and they didn't ban it, right?
Yeah.
So it didn't become a weird episode of Footloose.
Yeah. Well, and we have, we have a diverse church in age and I mean, cultural background. I mean, we have so many different,
Nationalities.
so many different nations represented within our church. And to the point where people, they visit our church and I think it's truly a representation of our area. Like, we have a very diverse area as well. So, so in other words, like, you might live in a church, or, live in a town that has predominantly Caucasian or predominantly African American. And if your church reflects that, then okay, like that's but our whole area in Northern Virginia, the DC area, is so diverse. And I think our church has rightfully been like a reflection of people that are from all different backgrounds. And so when the onlooking world sees that we're different and we're still worshiping together, like, that should be a testimony of peace and, testimony of God's grace, that we can live, even if we're different, or if we're, if we look different, or if we even have differing views on certain topics, whatever. Like, we have the unity that only comes from the gospel. But we still live in a world with opposing views and opposing, opinions, especially like in the political world. Like, there's, in DC area that we live in, there's so many different, everything is political, it seems like.
Yeah.
And so within that, we see a lot of stuff come out with different views, preferences, like you mentioned, like, I don't like this certain thing. And I think some of us, are, some of our mentality towards that, like even as pastors within our own congregation here, is really helping people to differentiate. Okay, is this a preference, or is it a cultural preference? Is it a personal preference that you just don't like certain things, or is this a command that they're violating? Like, and to identify, okay, is this wrong, or is this just different? Mm-hmm. And I think that even small distinction has eliminated a lot of conflict, where we're just helping people to see, okay, just because they do it differently doesn't mean that they're wrong, right? Because it may not be a moral issue. It's like, should we have, the sermon start, exactly 16 minutes into the service or 23 minutes into the service? Is that a preference, or is that wrong? And of course we would say, of course, there's not like a right or wrong, aspect to that. And so part of that is even, identifying like a pathway for people that feel like they're in conflict, just to kind of evaluate themselves. So what are some questions that maybe you've asked yourself, or you've encouraged other people to take, to ask themselves before they take a conflict to someone else, or, before they think that it needs to be mediated, or, that needs to be addressed? What are some things that you would encourage someone that is wrestling with, okay, I need to go talk to this person, or is it just not a big deal?
Yeah, I would say one example, and it kind of answers the question, but I remember several years ago, I implemented using the sealed cups for communion. And this was long before a certain virus hit the world and all that. I was just thinking, like, guys are gross and they don't wash their hands, and like, does everybody want to be dipping in the same tray and getting their chunk of bread? And so, but I had a couple people that were very upset because it wasn't the traditional bread, it wasn't the traditional juice or whatever, and then even go as far as like, I don't like the way it tastes. And so I was like, all right, so let me point you to Mark 7, like traditions of man versus the commandments of God. It's clear in God's word that we're supposed to remember what the Lord did by celebrating communion, the Lord's Supper. And it says often. So, some churches, they'll do oftens once a month. For us, it's every Sunday. But the point is like that we're to observe it. What it's not in there, and we've talked about this, prescriptive versus descriptive. It doesn't say whether or not it should be sealed, whether it should be tasting nasty or whatever, right? But I was just trying to help them take a wrap off and realize, like, the important thing is we're celebrating Christ and remembering him by observing the Lord's Supper, communion. And so I think that's one way. Like, Mark 7 is a great lens to look through when people get anxious about things in the church. But I think the other is, again, like, before you start filling information, this void with false information, to actually go to your brother or sister, and actually just have a kind conversation and make sure you even have all the facts. And then Matthew 18, of course, has some better guidance for us for next steps, right?
Yeah. And before you even get to that Matthew 18 progression that God kind of gives us, within the body of Christ, like with other believers, I mean, give grace for small offenses. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
if you're offended by something, that doesn't mean that you didn't feel that way. I mean, like, so obviously don't deny how you felt, but at the same time, give grace. Like, I mean, people do stuff that maybe, offending you, but that they didn't realize it, or they didn't, so give grace to that. And there's even, Proverbs 19:11 says, good sense makes one slow to anger. The idea of, like we've talked before about the long fuse,
Yeah.
where you're really helping other people to, um, give them the benefit of the doubt. So oftentimes, like when we say like, we see that there's a conflict happening, one person is offended and the other person has no idea that they even offended you. Like, I mean, so going to them and just explaining it to them would be that first step in Matthew 18 here, where it says,
Yeah.
if someone offends you, if someone wrongs you, to go approach them by yourself and to show them their fault. And if they're not repentant, or if they're not, receptive to that, then you take 2 or 3 other people with you. And this is where the most, one of the most taken out of context verses happens. Yeah. Where, we have Matthew 18:20, where it says, for where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I with them. This is not talking about a church service, where it's like, God, you're here with us now because,
Or prayer.
yeah, or prayer, or if you're just gathering with a few believers, like, because what does that ultimately communicate? That God's not with us if we're by ourselves? Well, of course he is. He's with us all the time.
Right.
And so when it comes to that, it's, often taken out of context, but in the context here, it's talking about when you go with 2 or 3 other believers to confront someone in their sin or their fault, he's saying, I'm with you. You have my authority to do that. Like, I want you to realize that I'm going with you. Like, I'm behind you in that support. And that does a few things. So one, if you have 2 or 3 other people that are saying, no, this is wrong, that's kind of affirming or, confirming that what they did was actually wrong. Because sometimes, again, we can get all riled up and stuff because someone personally offended us, and it may not even be, it might just be a preference. And then, of course, if they're not responsive to that correction, after 2 or 3 people are involved, then what happens?
Yeah. I mean,
We bring them before the church. So there's a disciplinary, process that our church has, and there's like, different ways, of getting into that, like where, obviously if they're members, there's easier way to do that, because we're calling them to accountability to what they, but you bring other church leaders into it. So in our case, like a lot of times we might have people that have conflict with each other, and they'll, like come and ask our opinion, or they'll come and involve us. And what's the first thing that we usually say is like, well, have you talked to them personally? Like, one, well, no, I just thought that you should know. But, well, no. Like,
right.
Go talk to them first.
Yeah.
And then, as appropriate, like, is there a way that you can bring in some other leaders? And if not, bring in us then afterward to kind of mediate or to help with that.
I think too, context wise, even for the listeners, you and I, we've been, I think I'm approaching 13 years, and you've been here longer than me. And I mean, in my time in the Ho Church with thousands of people, I mean, I've seen this discipline carried out through the last step, where you've actually removed people from the church twice, and both times it was criminal. Right. I mean, so we're very slow to go down this road, and to be cautious. But I think too, along the way, like what you originally said about like that one-on-one stuff, Ephesians 4:32 is very good counsel on being tenderhearted, forgive each other, just like Christ Jesus forgave us, right?
Yep.
And so I think, like, to me, I would never want to run out of opportunities to be asking God for forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And he expects his children to do the same thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean there isn't consequences, and there certainly isn't, like, repercussions for different things and different offenses. But the ideal, like, to, because the verse before that, Ephesians 4:31, we've talked about when we addressed anger, like that first step, bitterness. Like, if you let bitterness get in your heart, like, that's going to impact, your own spiritual walk, and it's going to impact all your other relationships. So it needs to be addressed.
Definitely. Now, what would you say to someone who just hates conflict? Like, they just hate being at odds with other people, and they will avoid it at all costs. So, like, what happens when you live like that? What happens when you just, even if someone wronged you and you know that they're wrong, but you're just not going to bring it up because you just don't want to confront them. You just hate confrontation. What is some advice for people out there that may be wrestling with really trying to avoid confrontation, but still needing to deal with conflict?
I guess I would address it, just generic. I remember when I first came on staff, I actually had a lady teach conflict resolution. And because there was a couple people on staff that were very timid, and I recognized that. I wanted to equip them, because I know, like, part of ministry is going towards trouble. And so I would just say, you're changing yourself if you don't learn those skills. And I know a lot of people, depending on how your childhood went, like you're a people pleaser, and recognizing that's the first step to recognize your default mode is to cave and really, the phrase, what they used to call, people like that, like doormats, right? And it's like, you're
Yeah,
not
people walk all
called to
over
be
you.
a doormat and just to be stepped on your whole life. And you can still go towards people in love, right? So it doesn't have to be this fisticuff, this big thing. And I think what you find is that it's kind of like working out, right? At first, it might be a little challenging. You're going to get a little sore,
Yep.
but over time, you're going to develop that muscle to where you realize, like, there is a way I can actually deal with conflict, and even to see it resolve in a
Yeah.
peaceful way is going to reinforce that behavior, right?
Yeah.
And so you're going to get that muscle memory, like, hey, I did this and it worked well. Where that definition of insanity, like doing the same thing expecting different results. Like if you just keep tucking and running and you just feel beat up, then yeah, like that's how you're going to feel, and you're going to feel defeated your whole life.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage people, as scary as it is, like we talked about this previously, like let prayer be your first resort. Like talk to God about people before you talk to people about God or about the situation.
Definitely, definitely. And one of the things that was helpful, and I think it was the same training that we're referring to, those crucial conversations and basically how to have those difficult conversations. So there's one thing of like, okay, knowing that it's a problem, but then like it's a skill that you can actually develop to have difficult conversations. And I think part of that is one, and it helped me because before, like I know, like I just had a difficult conversation this past week where I had to plan for it, and I had to think about like what I want for the person, what do I want for myself, what do I want for the relationship, what's the desired outcome. I had to walk through these questions that we kind of learned in that crucial conversations training, where sometimes it helps to prepare, to set up an appointment with someone to talk to them. If you know that there's opposing views and there's high stakes, there could be strong emotions. Those are all key indicators that this is a crucial conversation that needs to happen. And so how do we go about that? So in other words, that might be that first stage of the Matthew 18. Well, it helps to know what you're trying to resolve. Because if you're not careful, it can just be a disagreement and then it just gets down in the weeds and then you're not really solving or moving forward with anything. So those three questions are what I ask. I actually write them out, or like I have a Google Doc that I type up whatever that helps me to prepare for a conversation like that. Is what do I want for that person? Like ultimately, like if we're believers, we care about other believers and we want them to follow the Lord. We want them to grow in their relationship with Christ. We want them to still have the relationships that they need to have around them. We want the best for them. In other words, that should be our goal. If we just want to tear them down, like if that's our goal, then that's of course not. We're not in a place right now where we'd have a successful conversation. What do you want for you? So in other words, really defining like, okay, what would be the best outcome for me in this circumstance? Well, I want to be heard. I want them to acknowledge that what they said was wrong, or what they did to me felt hurtful, or whatever. And then what do you want for the relationship? Well, obviously we want to restore that relationship. The purpose of that Matthew 18 progression is ultimately restoration. Like it's always restoration. It's not like, well, I'm going to prove to them that I'm a better person, or I'm going to prove to them that they're wrong, or I'm going to win this debate. It's like, no, none of those are viable, goals for resolution. We want to make sure that we're moving forward and that we're asking those questions. Then the third question is, what do you want for that relationship? And ultimately you want to still be friends with them. You still want them to respect you and to move forward without there being a division or a conflict there. And so when it comes to relational conflict, it can be so difficult to see like a higher view of it, or to kind of see outside the situation. What are some questions that that's someone that's dealing with a conflict, or maybe it's a continual conflict where people have been hurting them over and over again? And we're not talking about like physical hurting. Like we're not talking about like you're in an abusive relationship or yeah, that's a whole separate category where we would say, get out of that. Like that, that would be, like call the police, like get the authorities involved with that kind of stuff. But I'm talking about maybe emotional manipulation, or maybe someone that's saying unkind words like over and over. Like it seems to be a repeat offender. Is it ever appropriate, or what questions should someone ask to really help them to determine like, okay, should I take a break from spending time with this person, or to kind of sever ties for a season in a respectful way? Obviously not just in a big blow up, like I'm never talking to you again, but what are some questions for that person that might be dealing with a repeat offender that's continually hurting them?
Yeah. Every relationship's unique, but certainly boundaries are things that need to be established. And so I think depending on what it is, like obviously in a marriage, take, one of the most important relationships that, they have, a husband and wife, like boundaries don't mean like that you retreat and you hide and you isolate in one room and they isolate in the other and you call it good. Like that's not healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's, I think, along with, Matthew 18, I think if you're asking those questions and the same thing keeps happening and it's toxic, I do think it's time for people like that to consider professional help, to actually get a neutral person. And, Pastor Joe Henrique, has poured into my life for years. He's a retired pastor now. And I know you know him well, but I learned even watching him when I was younger, and he was really good at just listening, and he wouldn't affirm what you said is true. He would just listen. And I think I found myself just assuming that everybody spoke the truth. Because, I mean, my goodness, like they're in church and they're talking to a pastor. They wouldn't lie, right? And unfortunately, we learned that people even lie in church, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's taking on all the information. And especially if you're called to be that third party, right, to listen, it's always wise. Like sometimes, and it's sad, but like in these chairs, I only get to meet with one of the spouses because the other one doesn't want to meet. And that only gives me one side of the story. Yeah. And so it's hard to navigate, those relationships and that problem when I'm only hearing from one of them, because they might be a phenomenal salesman and they just totally snowed me. Mm-hmm. And so, but boy, you can read a room when both are present, right? Yeah. And that's when it's telling. And a lot of times you'll meet with people and you think you're meeting about one topic and then another thing totally shows up. But I would say, back to your original question, I'm ranting now. It is this ideal of, I don't know if I have a list of questions to ask, but I think it's like, how's this relationship impacting you? You said something that I think is wise too, like especially if it's dating or if it's friendship and stuff like that, it may be healthy to take a break. Like if this person just keeps beating you down, why are you still involved in this relationship?
Yeah.
Right. It's not wise.
Well, and I think, even just, we see this a lot with family relationships with, just dysfunction within families, and there still seems to be hurt. It's like, every time they get together for family gatherings, they're walking away with tears, or, they're being hurt in those ways. And it even asks like, some of that stuff is preference, is it just my preferences that I'm getting so offended about? Like, is this something that's just, or is it something that they're actually doing wrong that we need to confront when it comes to sin according to God's word? And some of the things that it's helped me to kind of frame is, can I point to a specific verse where they're in violation of, like if we're really trying to confront, sin, or is it just a preference that I just don't like the way they talk to me, or I don't want, and so when it comes to that, to really focus on, asking yourself, is it preferences or is it, actual sin? What is the actual wrongdoing? What is the verse that they're violating, or what is the command of scripture? And then two, seeking wise counsel. So like asking other people, again, like not necessarily like the one-sided thing where, but if it's a type of relationship, like a marriage or a dating, like meet with a pastor, meet with a counselor, meet with someone that can have a neutral aspect, like you were saying, to kind of help you to figure out like, okay, this is the barrier that you guys keep getting on. Like, it's literally just, if you remove this part, then you can kind of see clearly how to move forward. Sometimes you're just at odds and pounding heads so much that you don't realize, okay, just remove this one thing. It's like, we're triggered every time we talk about this topic. It's like, okay, well, how are some ways that we can address that topic otherwise? So yeah, but ultimately, our desire is to seek peace and to pursue it. It's not accidental when we're living in a sinful world with other sinners. Yeah. And so we want to lean into the Lord through prayer, and we want to, to live at peace with other people as long as it depends on us.
Yeah. What I found too is, not that this is totally on topic, but a lot of times too, we can be the cruelest with the people we love the most, right? Like, I mean, you can give yourself, us as pastors, we can spend all this time and energy and patience with people in the church. And then you go home and you lose it with your wife or your children or your grandchildren. And you're like, oh my goodness, what is wrong with me? Right. And so I think even those relationships reveal just how selfish and how broken we are. Even as believers, like we still have that old nature that we got to fight with every day.
Yeah. So true. All right. So let's transition to some rapid fire questions here.
All right.
So what is the best but yet appropriate military nickname you've ever heard?
For myself or anybody?
Anybody. Well, I mean, let's start off with yours. Have you had several nicknames?
I've had a few.
You've had a few.
I've had
Which
a
the
few.
one we talked about here before?
Yeah,
What was like the?
Yes.
What was it? The
I remember it.
something darkness or what was
Yeah.
it?
The Prince of Darkness.
Yeah,
that
which
was
is so ironic, but
very
yeah,
appropriate for a previous youth pastor. Yeah. Context, it was because I did not cuss or yell at students going through SEAL training.
You would just whisper the
I'd
commands.
whisper and tell them awful
which
things
is kind of terrifying when you think about it. Like, you know, someone's
that was the goal. My job was to make them quit.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I mean, certainly pilots, you know, they all have call signs, so they have some cool ones, you know, and a lot of times you never get to pick your own. So there's a little bit of a jab in there too, depending on the nicknames. But I kind of like one of the previous, he was SecDef also, I believe, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Mad Dog. Like he was just, and he's the originator of the quote, like, be nice to everyone and have a plan to kill them.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's good. All right, so you know, of course, I'm sure you've seen military movies that are so inaccurate that you roll your eyes. But what are some actually good military movies? Like, what is your favorite military movie?
I kind of like the old ones, like the original Dirty Dozen with Lee Marvin. Like I like that one. Lee Marvin was one of those characters where he was on Iwo Jima, so he was an actual Marine. And he was wounded there, and so I think
Captain Kangaroo.
That's Captain Kangaroo's the one that saved him, right?
Yeah.
And so I like that one because I mean, and even from what I read, like I guess he was in fist fights on a regular basis. Like he was just a brawler, and so that probably takes away from the pastoral recommendation here. But the movie itself, like I like the old ones. I don't, and again, these aren't necessarily recommendations from my Bible preaching days, but I remember one movie that's pretty cool too, Uncommon Valor. It's an old movie and dated, and it's about like one of those Vietnam rescues and stuff like that. But I don't know if I have a favorite, and I don't even remember the name of the one. Something about like I don't know if it was the 13 Horsemen or whatever, but you know the original invasion of Afghanistan, and Thor himself. You know he was one of the main Green Beret guys, and so that was a pretty cool one. But yeah, I actually don't watch a lot of war movies.
So I'm really shocked that you did not say Rambo. I mean, just because of how accurate it is, and
just no comment. No comment.
All right, so favorite military. Okay, what's the first thing that you did when you first got home from deployment? I mean, we've talked a little about you decompressing a little bit. So once you actually got home, got to spend some time with the family. Like, was there a tradition there?
No, I mean, I think the last time I came home from Afghanistan, knowing that was my last deployment, I kissed old terra firma. Like it was good to just be back on American soil, and so I was pretty happy about that. But I think the big traditions were again just I couldn't wait to see my wife and kids. Like that was a big deal, and from the very first time I came back, where having a son that I hadn't met yet, 3.5 months old, like. Yeah, coming home to family was a really big deal. And then for the SEAL teams, they're very quiet homecomings. A lot of times you're arriving at 2 a.m. and you got a sleepy wife.
Well, no one knows that what you just did or anything.
Yeah. No, and possibly no one cares. But you're home and your wife and kids care, and so those are really sweet. And so definitely just coming home in general and seeing family was a big deal.
So, what was the funniest thing that happened to you while in the service?
Oh man, yeah. I don't know. I should have read this one in advance to filter all my stories in my brain. I've seen a lot of funny things, and I'm just trying to filter them out right now. What's appropriate to share? I've seen some goofy, really it goes more to, I think, even pranks that have been done on teammates and stuff, and I mean, I've seen the classic.
But you would check you would right before they jump out of the plane, you would say, never mind.
Yeah, that one, that's classic. Everybody's done that, where like they play around with your parachute and they're like, oh no, you're good. I'd jump it, so that's always a little unnerving. Yeah. I have had some where I remember one time I told these new guys jumping with me, I said, you guys are actually pretty brave, because a lot of weird stuff happens when I parachute. Like, I've seen people die, like planes catch on fire, and they're like looking at me like, sure, whatever, old guy, And this was, I think we were in Mildenhall, England. It was a training jump, and we had a duck, again, like rubber boat with the parachute on it, and we're going to jump out. And we see the aircrew guy running around on the plane, going nuts and looking out the windows and then looking out the other window. He's like, you guys need to get jacked up and ready to jump. Like 3 out of 4 engines are on fire. I just look at the new guys. I'm like, I told you, and so we had to jump out of the plane early, just to, and then they safely landed, but,
Yeah.
so that was always fun, just picking fights and stuff like that and
Yeah.
teasing new guys. But I think the funnier ones are always toilet humor, and including porta potties. I've definitely seen guys going porta potties where they're not only trucker strapped in, but then like flipped upside down, and that that can generate a hornet's nest inside that thing, and you need a lot of bravery to be the person who
Yeah.
lets them out.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I can imagine. Okay. So if you could have any military vehicle for personal use, what would it be?
Wow. I mean, Abrams tank would be cool, but it'd be hard to park.
Yeah.
A fun one, and it was popular on the West Coast. I didn't get to drive it much, but I did get to drive them once. Was just the good old desert patrol vehicles, the DPVs. They were just like these souped up dune buggies, and so there's no armor, but they got gun mounts and stuff. But they were just a lot of fun to drive. And then I've driven a lot of other cool vehicles that certainly, is cool when you got like remote control gun turrets and stuff like that. But yeah, I'd stick with the classic, like just the good old fashioned DPV. We got the GI Joe version at the house, so that's about as close as I'll come to driving one. But
there you go.
they're fun.
All right. So most unusual place that you've ever slept,
Most unusual.
like overnight.
Yeah. Well, I would say I remember one time where I had an extremely long turtleback, which turtleback means, like a lot of times you'd lock out of a submarine or you would indigenous fishing craft or whatever, you'd insert somewhere. And to conserve your oxygen on your diving rig, you would just fin on your back with your dive buddy. And we had, we had 5 digits worth of meters to turtleback. And then we had a very long dive. It was kind of an experimental dive on how far to dive. And I remember just like in our dive gear, just kind of like pulling up in some rocks and catching like a 2-hour nap, in the surf and just like resting there in the middle of nowhere. That was interesting. And
Are you able to say like what part of the world that was, or
it was the ocean.
it was the ocean? Okay, all right, that narrows it down. Yeah.
And I have slept in we used to have also 2-man kayaks called Kleppers. So they're backpackable. I've slept in those where we take turns, and just, like 20, 30-hour paddles, and like you just get you a power nap because you're smoked. Yeah. And I've slept on the side of cliffs, on mountains and stuff like that. But that's not that unusual. A lot of people have done that, and then of course snow caves or something.
Yeah, I mean, if I had a nickel for every time that I've slept on the side of a cliff,
exactly,
I'd be very poor. Okay, so if you could have dinner with any historical military figure, who would it be?
Wow, any historical military figure? Huh? I don't know. I think, just throwing a dart at the board, there's a lot of them I'd like to have dinner with. I don't know if I could rank them, but I think Eisenhower would be kind of cool. Yeah, because not only, was he involved in obviously World War II, but also being, I think, if I remember right, the first director of the CIA. I think he'd be an interesting fellow to chat with and learn his perspective on things. He also came up with that, the whole Eisenhower decision matrix, the whole urgent and important boxes. And so, from what I've read of him, like he was just a brilliant person. So that'd be an interesting person to have dinner with.
Yeah. All right. So today we talked about conflict, and our survival tip has to do with a different kind of conflict. So you want to cover our survival tip of the week when it comes to weapons training?
Yeah. And again, like just in general, weapons training, I would encourage you. And again, like we got a wide variety of listeners. We got some people that are, pastors, and we got other people that are just stumbled across the website. And so I know there's a lot of different views on weapon training. And when I say weapon training, I mean, weapons that shoot bullets. I do think it's a valuable skill. I think a lot of people see them as scary, and, and they don't understand, like it's a tool. Like it's just like a knife. You and I carry knives, and I'm a big fan of having a knife, but like, I'll just share my own personal view on it. Like every day I have to make a decision, like to conceal carry, because I want to actually be able to take care of good people that are, in the grocery store, in whatever store, and then evil shows up. I want to be able to have options to deal with that evil on that day. And there's been a few times where I've forgotten my weapon in the house, and I'm in the vehicle, and I'm like, then you have a decision to make, right? And I'm like, don't be lazy. Don't be that guy. Go back in. Because sure enough, and even my wife has questioned my scruples sometimes, like, you're just going to the grocery store. But I mean, watch the news. Like, sometimes it goes down the grocery store. So
I kind of see it like a seatbelt. Sometimes it's like, it doesn't matter how many times you've worn a seatbelt before. You only need to wear it when you need it, right? I mean, that's the big thing.
And so I think that's, to me, it's getting comfortable enough where you can carry safely. And if for some reason you're just so opposed to guns, then get other types of training where you can defend yourself and you can defend others, especially the people you love. Whether it's can of CS powder. They even have some pretty cool little weapons I've seen recently that shoot like CS paintballs almost. And for the average thug, that might disable them. Now if they're armed, that's a whole nother game, right? And so, yeah, but I think weapons training in general, and there's so many great organizations that teach men and women of all ages on how to use them safely and how to carry. But that's an individual decision. Like, everybody has different views, especially in the church. But to me, weapons training, as far as a survival skill, is a phenomenal one to have. And it just gives you another option to deal with a conflict.
Yep. Well, that concludes another episode of The Warrior's Walk. Thank you so much for tuning in. One of the best ways that you can help this podcast grow is if you share this with other people. So if you've gotten value from our content, please share with other people that might get value from it as well. So please subscribe, like, comment, do all the things so that helps other people see our content. And we'll see you on the next episode.